This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back. Home stretch here on Inside the Paint. And the Bam Adebayo questions continue. Somebody says this, Ira. There's no way Bam Adebayo can be the number 2 player on a championship team. The number 2 what is what I would add. The number 2 scorer? No, I agree with that. You need to go out and get yourself another scorer. And maybe that's where Kyrie Irving comes into play. But the number 2 overall player? Are you kidding me? Do you watch what this guy does defensively? Like, the fact that people, I think, downplay his positives and focus too much on what he seemingly can't do yet, that's where the nuanced conversation has to come in. And that's where, like, you have to immediately dismiss the bum Adebayo, or he's not. Like, there are things that he needs to get better at. Absolutely. But you can't tell me that if this team added a legitimate scorer, somebody down the stretch, and who knows, maybe Tyler Hero gets to that point. But you can't tell me that if you didn't have another scorer on this team, that Bam Adebayo, let's just say this, Ira, and I'm gonna pitch this to you. Let's say Tyler Hero elevated his game next year, and Tyler Hero became a, I don't know, 24 point per game scorer, but also the guy that down the stretch, you're comfortable with him getting into the lane, getting his own shot, and making those shots in the moment of truth. And his defensive game just elevated this much to where you're able to put him on the floor late in games. I think that team could win a championship. I think that team could contend for a championship and win one. And I think Bam Adebayo would still be the second best overall player on that team. And that's the sort of like nuanced conversation that if you want to have that conversation with me, then fine. But saying that he can't be the number 2 player on a championship team, that's where I got to draw the line, because it's downplaying, if not straight up ignoring.
Right. I don't want to harp on this too much because we got like actual live stuff coming up with free agency in the draft. But I will say this. So I'll lean in here. In 2 of the last 3 years, the Heat were in the NBA Finals with Bam Adebayo and didn't win a championship in part because he was injured in those finals.
As your second best player.
As your second best player. Shot of making the NBA Finals. Clay, no team has been to the NBA Finals more than once in the last 3 seasons. It was the Heat and Lakers 2 years ago. Last year, it was the Suns and the Bucks. This year, of course, the Warriors and the Celtics. So the Heat have gone as far playoff-wise with Bam Adebayo as any team has in the last 3 years in the NBA. So this notion of where Bam can take you, they've been to the NBA Finals. They've been within one game of the one shot, one play of the NBA Finals. This whole, you've got to blow it up. You've got to change it. You've got to redo all this. Look, Jimmy Butler's the linchpin, and I don't think on a Jimmy Butler team you necessarily will ever have a definitive number 2. Some games it'll be Tyler Hero. We saw in the finals, there were 2 games. It was Bam Adebayo, 31 points and 25 points. That's plenty. Sometimes it can be Kyle Lowry and his scoring. Maybe player X, they wind up getting in a trade, Jeremy Grant or someone like that. I get that. But I don't think this is ever going to be a definitive team of Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, or Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. I don't think that's how Eric Spoelstra builds his teams. I don't think he has a big board. Jimmy, 20 shots. Player B, 18 shots. Because player B can be a different player every time. So I think that's where you are with Bam. No, he's not the prototypical quintessential number 2 on both ends. But he's so unique defensively, you take care of it on the other end. But come on, Clay, we got rumors to talk about.
Well, and no, but this is where it's leading me. Like, everybody's favorite player. So let's get into it. Kyrie Irving. And by the way, I think you can make some of the same thoughts that we're going to say about Kyrie Irving about Bradley Beal. I think if you were to bring in Kyrie Irving, you were to bring in a Bradley Beal, they'd be your number 1 scorer. I mean, they'd score more than Jimmy Butler.
Because Jimmy defers, right?
Right. But they wouldn't be your number 1 best player, because you would still say, oh, Jimmy Butler does all this stuff. I'm not sure. If you were to go get a Kyrie Irving tomorrow, if you were to go get a Bradley Beal, both of those players, in particular Bradley Beal, who if you look at the defensive metrics around the NBA, he is like the second worst wing defender in the NBA when it comes to individual defense. So I don't know that if you were to bring in somebody like him, who is a dynamic, fantastic scorer and would immediately put this team up in the conversation of the best teams in the NBA, I'm still not sure that he's not your third best player overall. behind a Bam Adebayo. So maybe that's just me putting a higher premium on what Bam Adebayo can do. But let's talk about Kyrie. And if you were to bring in a Kyrie Irving, he would be your best scorer. But is this even worth having a conversation, Ira? And I'm not just talking about, oh, Kyrie Irving has an injury history. Kyrie Irving is getting up there in years now relative to where he was when you could make the case that he was Finals MVP the year that Cleveland won it. In fact, Golden State players said he was the one that scared them more so than LeBron. But now Kyrie Irving seems to be scaring his own organizations, seems to be scaring his own teammates. Is this a conversation? Is this a possibility that you even entertain calling Brooklyn, seeing if there's a way to make this happen, or even calling around and potentially trying to facilitate getting rid of a Kyle Lowry salary and a Duncan Robinson salary and trying to do something crazy to where you're bringing in Kyrie Irving as your number 2 scorer and potentially your biggest name on the team?
So I'll play the game with you here. Would you trade Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson, those two, for Kyrie Irving? Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson. Come on, I got other names.
Okay, look. I asked Jimmy Butler, and if Jimmy Butler is what, because I think you need to have Jimmy Butler feel like he's in a good spot.
Jimmy Butler signs on because he's a cold-blooded MFer and he just wants to win. And you're the godfather of my daughter, but bye-bye. Would you trade Duncan Robinson and Kyle Lowry for Kyrie Irving?
Yes.
Would you trade Duncan Robinson, Kyle Lowry, and Tyler Hero for Kyrie Irving?
No.
And you paused there a little bit, so I'll give you the third option, and then those 3 in some package of draft picks. Here's the deal. I would consider a deal for Kyrie Irving because he might be the best one-on-one scorer in the NBA, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen the Heat need that, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen Kyrie do it. My concerns are multifold. Going on multiple years on a guy who knows nothing about stability and seemingly always wants to be somewhere. Number 1, probably talking about new contract, 4 or 5 years, mega money, putting you in the John Wall, James Harden, Russell Westbrook area, where if it goes to crap, you're stuck. Number 1. Number 2, we're still in a coronavirus era. We just are. And there are new variants, and next season might be a coronavirus season. If Kyrie Irving is not vaccinated and he's showing no inclination toward, then if you give Kyrie Irving a new contract and you pay him something similar to what he'd opt out of or what he has on the books of $38 million for next year, and all of a sudden he's the lone player on your team who has to test, and all of a sudden he winds up missing considerable time because he's not vaccinated, and maybe other jurisdictions come up with rules like Brooklyn or Toronto had, and I think Toronto still has now for the playoffs. That's a concern in a coronavirus world. But I am not, like other people, including Big O, summarily dismissing Kyrie Irving because, 1, I know for a fact when Kyrie was available after Cleveland and after Boston, the Heat were at least listening because they had to, because he is a generational one-on-one scoring talent. Remember the game they played down here? Durant didn't play. The Nets were down by 49 million points, and then they were within 3 because Kyrie scored, I think, like 18 straight points on his own.
Yes.
He can do that. That's a really good weapon to have at your disposal. It helped win a championship in Cleveland. It helped get Brooklyn to the precipice of Kevin Durant's foot in overtime, wasn't on the three-point line. So I think any team that says they're not considering it is lying because they're saying they're not considering it after considering it. So, yeah, if Kyrie plays out this stuff, because, again, I spoke to Big O about this, and he said, look, Ira, don't compare what they did with Anthony Mason when he was troubled. Don't compare what they did with Tim Hardaway when he was benched by the Warriors. This is such a different level of extreme. I'm not sure there's ever been any player so problematic as Kyrie because he's out in the flat earth land over there that you can't even figure out this dude. But I know one thing from doing this for 34 years. Talent trumps all.
Yep.
And I have seen some major a-holes, not saying that Kyrie is, but I've seen some major a-holes win multiple championships. So if you are playing to win the game, you have to at least consider it. Then it comes down to what I just offered to Clay. How far out do you go? Do you go Kyle? Do you go Tyler Hero? Do you go multiple draft choices? But you at least consider it. And I do think, Clay Ferraro, that the Nets are so sick of the whole situation.
I agree with this.
They can reset and say, you know what? With Kevin Durant and just pieces, every team has been on, from Oklahoma City, from Golden State, even from us, when Kyrie wasn't playing, we were still a damn competitive team. So maybe with the veteranship of Kyle Lowry, with Ben Simmons playing off the ball, maybe even in a power forward role, with Tyler Hero's replacement scoring for Kyrie Irving, it might work that I think Brooklyn would at least consider it. So I think Kyrie Irving will be in play until he says something definitive about Brooklyn, and Kyrie Irving never says anything definitive about anyone.
We have a new guest in the chat. Orlando Alzugaray says, "No way on Kyrie. No way on Kyrie."
And you know what? And Clay, even if Big O and other listeners and other people in the chat room here on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show think that way, I respect your opinions. But what I'm saying is, there's no way in hell that he'd summarily dismiss the possibility that I think Pat Riley sits in his office with Andy Ellisberg, with Adam Simon, with Nick Harrison, with Eric Amsler, with everyone who has any insight, with all his NBA contacts, and say, okay, what next? Because one, Kyrie Irving spent a lot of time training in South Florida.
Yep.
His former agent, Jeff Wexler, is based down here. He spent a lot of time at Heat games. He knows the lay of the land. He knows the landscape. So he knows what playing for the Heat would be like. And I think he is about winning in his own unique way.
Agree.
So the question is, how far do you bend? The Heat bent way far for LeBron James. They originally said none of your people in the locker room. Then all of his people are in the locker room. They said no special treatment. Then all the special treatment. When Pat Riley went out to Vegas in 2014, before LeBron left, I'm sure he was willing to offer him anything and everything in order to wind up keeping him. So end of the day, you know what? If the Heat have to make concessions to a talent, you do it for an all-time talent, for a Hall of Fame level scorer. And there have been a crap ton of Hall of Fame level scorers in this league, Clay, who couldn't defend worth a lick. Right.
And that's where I'm okay. So when you said Tyler Hero and I said no, adding him to the package, this is why. The thing with going after a Kyrie Irving now is exactly what you said. It's like, on paper, man, this is beautiful. There is like the way this could come together with the talent and the way their games play off of each other. It would just be, you could allow Bam to be Bam, and he would still be, in my mind, the second best overall player on the team. But he could score 0 points a game, and you'd be fine with that because you've got this beautiful thing in the backcourt. The problem comes in where you talk about what happens at the moment of truth, and I'm not talking about in the fourth quarter of a game when Kyrie Irving is on the floor. I'm talking about in the playoffs, and we're back in another surge with COVID. So you can't just say we're going all in on this year and summarily dismissing the future because there are extra things at play in addition to potential injuries, things like that, to where I don't want to completely clear the deck of my future assets to where you're giving up on the future. You could potentially do that. Like if you told me tomorrow, and hey, let's use the name LeBron James, right? Who's also well up there in years. Like if there were some way you could bring in a LeBron James, like he wanted out of the Lakers, then you're throwing all the assets at the Lakers because you don't have those extra questions about what happens if there's another COVID surge. Like that's a different, and I see the smile on your face. Like, this is opening a new can of worms. But the thing with Kyrie, as talented as he is, there are extra things off the floor that might blow the whole thing up at the end of the year. So that's why I'm less inclined to give up all of my future assets. But if you're talking about giving up a couple of contracts to bring him in on this roster, I'd
rather have Kyrie. Orlando's head's going to explode, but I'd rather have Kyrie Irving than LeBron James at this stage. Because for LeBron James, things do get more difficult for him at this age.
Wow.
This is an NBA of flat-out scores. Clay, look, who's the current face of the NBA right now? I'm putting you on the spot. Who's the current face of the NBA? It's obvious. It's obvious.
Steph.
Right, it's Steph.
Yeah.
Steph Curry's not a defender. All the opposing team does is try to set up Steph Curry by playing the high pick and roll, getting the switch going to work. In today's NBA, not even in 3-5 years ago NBA, you can survive with that kind of player because it's all about outscoring the other team. I've always been fascinated watching Kyrie Irving, one, when he's on the court and available, and again, availability is the best ability. I get all that. I don't think there's a better, including Steph, one-on-one scorer in the NBA than Kyrie Irving. And if I can get the best one-on-one scorer in the NBA, I'm willing to put up with a whole crap ton of BS because that's such a hard thing to find. And man, when you don't have to have Jimmy busting his ass, and you're telling me you have Jimmy Butler and Kyrie Irving and Bam Adebayo. Matter of fact, Clay, I'm going to pause you right here, and I know we're right up against it. Jimmy Butler, Kyrie Irving, and Bam Adebayo. Every other team stays copacetic. Where does that put you in the Eastern Conference?
You're number one.
Number one's a good place to be. Number
Pretty
one's
good.
a good place to be. Screw the future.
Have fun with this, Big O. Bye-bye. We'll talk to you next week.